8 weeks ago, this pumpkin patch that you see behind me was part of our alfalfa hayfield, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we've done over the last 8 weeks to get to this point and why. Well, welcome to our first video here on New Era Acres. I'm Hunter Britton, and this is my wife, Katelyn.
And we are first-generation livestock and pumpkin farmers, and we're located in southeast Iowa, and we are on our family acreage.
So yeah, like Katelyn said, that we are first generation. We raise boar goats, and then we are just kind of seeking some different ways as we learn to do different things here on the acreage to try and diversify our income. So you might kind of ask, why a pumpkin patch? If you're just learning to do some of this different stuff, why something so specialty and unique? And really one of the first reasons why is the time of year that we are going to be moving onto the family acreage. So a little bit of background is we are found out that we are expecting our daughter. It'll be our first child here later on this year, and decided with my family that now is the right time for us to move onto the family acreage. We wanted to start and try and diversify our income, knowing that we're going to be out here full time, and there wasn't much else that we actually had time in the year to try and do that didn't require us being quite so hands-on every day. Pumpkins have been more hands-on than I was expecting them to be initially. In addition, minimal equipment. If you were going to go and do anything that really required a lot of heavy tillage, something specialty, we just don't have that kind of equipment. We did this all equipment-wise. It was with our little 35 horse New Holland and a old Kubota FS 1020 rototiller, and that was pretty much all that we used equipment-wise, I guess, besides a little finish mower. As I had said, we are expecting our firstborn child, our daughter, later on this year, and we felt that it was something that we can do year over year as a way to kind of build up for her college fund and her future, as well as something that as she gets older and possibly future kids can get involved in. Additionally, with her coming in November, something that we can kind of, I guess, use as an anticipation thing, can work on it, through the year as we are awaiting her arrival and going through the appointments and different things. I don't know. There's just something very poetic about, a crop coming up with a life change, I guess. I always kind of reminisce back on like how quickly time goes with how fast we cycle through crops here in Iowa and everything. So I don't know, something kind of poetic there. And then lastly, something pretty simple is just pumpkins are fun. All the different varieties and types, the seasonality of it, coming and picking out pumpkins with your family and carving them and all that. It just felt like something fun and unique to get into. One of the things that we had to do first, once we knew we were going to actually do something with the pumpkin patch, is determine which part of our farm we wanted to do this on. As you can see, this area here has a lot of road frontage, which when it comes time for selling, will make a lot of sense. But really, it was the logistics of this part of the property. Unfortunately, it's one of our highest producing areas as far as alfalfa. We raise all of our own hay for our goat herd. When growing a crop like pumpkins that needs heavily fed and things of that nature, we weren't anticipating it being quite as wet of a spring as we ended up with. So being close to water was a key factor for us to eliminate an even more high cost when it comes to the irrigation. Being located here placed us as close as we could without breaking up the middle of our alfalfa field. So as you can see, this is kind of the end of the hayfield. It runs out and around and wraps all the way around to the back side of our property. And that other back area of the property is what we plan on eventually using to expand pasture for our goat operation. So this is something that's kind of set aside from that, close up by the house and close to resources.
1 week after our first cutting, we took our finish mower and cut down the rest of the alfalfa to get it as short as possible. And then with our rototiller, we tilled in 2 separate passes going each direction to get those roots and everything that was left from the alfalfa broken up and out of the ground. And then with our drag harrow, we then went over the field a few times just to make sure we could get it as smooth as possible before we started laying out our rows.
So I will say the one thing is that with using the tractor It was supposed to be easy, but it ended up being way more manual labor than expected. We sit up on top of the river bluff, and there's a ton of clay soil that's very thick. I don't know, probably the first or second week of June. We'd gotten a lot of moisture throughout the month, but even up until then, and every 2 passes, I had to get off and get up underneath of this thing and use a shovel in my hands and pull all of the alfalfa crowns and roots and clay soil out. And it was just a bear. It was terrible. It took literally an entire 8-hour day and then some to get this tilled. This is what we used. We got I believe it's a TC33, a very similar model. It's one of the early 2000s, late 90s New Hollands with the super steer. It's a great little tractor. And then this tiller is something that my father-in-law found for us at an auction here in the last year or so, and this is our first time getting to use it. It was a lifesaver. Definitely some things I'll want to tweak on it in the future moving forward, but it did a really nice job, and just kind of goes to show that you don't need a ton of specialty equipment or large equipment to get stuff done. So as I said, kind of discussing the planning, is we ended up electing to do, I believe it was about 750 seeds that we actually ordered. That was comprised of originally 8 varieties. So we've got 3 carver varieties, a couple other novelties, and then we went with 3 different stacker varieties. And I'll sit down here in a minute and kind of go over each of them a little bit better and why we chose them. Okay, so now I want to talk a little bit about the 8 pumpkin varieties that we chose for our patch and kind of the thought process behind it when making those decisions. So for our first year, we decided to purchase our seed from Osborne Quality Seeds. We had seen them recommended several different times online, and they offered a lot of varieties that kind of fit the initial criteria that we were looking for. Additionally, they were really responsive when we did have questions, and the seeds shipped quickly, which is especially important when you are a little bit more last minute than ideal when planning a pumpkin patch. When we began comparing varieties, we really had 2 main requirements that we started with. First of all, we only considered varieties that were offered in a treated seed option. And secondly, each variety needed to have at least a moderate resistance level to powdery mildew. The reasoning behind these 2 initial criteria is pretty simple. We knew that there was going to be a large learning curve with this, and during our first year, we wanted to make sure that we tipped the scale in our favor as many ways as possible. In addition, once we had varieties that kind of checked those 2 initial boxes, we also opted to go with the varieties that had the shorter maturity window. Reason being for that is that since we were already a little bit behind the 8 ball, we wanted to go with pumpkins that we knew would have a better chance of being mature and marketable come the holiday and fall decorating seasons. So once we narrowed down our options, we wanted to start with our basic carving jack-o'-lantern pumpkins. I don't know about you, but growing up, whenever we visited the pumpkin patch, we were always searching for that, picture perfect orange, nice and round with the big ridges, that really perfect jack-o'-lantern carving pumpkin. And we figured that's still what most families are going to be coming to our farm stand for. So we knew traditional orange carvers needed to make up a large majority of our pumpkin patch. However, I didn't want to put all of our eggs or pumpkins per se in one basket, so we opted for 2 different varieties. First of all being the Hawk, and secondly the Hulk. Both varieties are supposed to be very uniform across the whole crop and produce several marketable pumpkins per plant. But the nice thing is that they give us 2 different size and shape varieties. So the Hawk is going to be a more medium-sized pumpkin. It's going to weigh about 15 to 20 pounds, whereas the Hulk is going to be a little bit larger, a more barrel shape versus the round. It's going to reach anywhere from 30 up to 40 pounds. So it gives a little bit of variety between them. Together, these 2 varieties made up about half the seed we ordered and put in the ground. However, after the rough start that we kind of had, it's a little questionable how much of our crop it'll end up making. The plants that are doing well are doing really well. We had some that we transplanted that kind of slowed down a little bit. With our carving pumpkins, though, I also wanted to add a little bit of variety, so we did opt for the Crystal Star. And Crystal Star is going to land right in between the Hawk and Hulk size-wise. still offer that nice round shape with the bigger ridges, but it's going to be a white carving pumpkin. So I think it'll look really nice with the farm stand having the big mix of orange and white, and then all of our other pumpkins, which kind of rolls us into the next type that we looked at, is our novelty pumpkins. For those, we opted to go with popcorn and grizzly bear. So popcorn is this creamy white, buttery yellow popcorn looking pumpkin with big heavy warts. It's going to be medium size, similar to hawk, and have that nice round shape. So I think it's going to be a really unique looking one. It was the first one that caught my eye. And then secondly, we have grizzly bear. It's going to be substantially smaller, about half the size, but it's really neat. It's got this mocha light brown color. It's going to be a little bit more sporadic in the warts and whatnot on it. And then proportionally has a really sturdy plump handle. So it's a kind of neat looking pumpkin that I think should do pretty well. We thought that both of these would add some interesting color and texture to mix and match with the other varieties that we're going to offer this year. Our final 3 varieties that we selected were specifically thinking about pumpkin stacking in mind. So we opted to go with the Indian Doll, the Jade Knight, and the Porcelain Princess. These 3 have a mix of colors amongst the 3 varieties, as well as a little bit different size and shapes, but will pair well for those looking to kind of do the stacking style of decorating on their porch. But they also look great on their own to mix and match amongst traditional carving jack-o'-lantern pumpkins. Indian Doll is the largest of the 3. It's going to have a little bit of a more flat pancake kind of shape, really deep ribs, and it's going to be anywhere from an orange to a pink in color. Jade Knight is going to be smaller, a greenish gray variety, and then Porcelain Princess is going to be a similar shape to Jade Knight, but it has a light pink skin with the really heavy ribbing. Another neat part of adding Porcelain Princess is that purchasing that helps to fund the Pink Pumpkin Patch Foundation and its efforts to fund breast cancer research. These are 8 main varieties we initially chose for the pumpkin patch. However, while we were purchasing supplies at the farm store, we did pick up some Jacoby Littles. They're this small little, really miniature pumpkin that I think will look nice to for those that are maybe looking for indoor and tabletop displays. Overall, our goal was to create a balanced mix of the classic pumpkins, some novelty fun stuff, and just a big mix with our small patch. I didn't want to strictly have just carving pumpkins. I wanted to have a little bit of something for everybody. So now it'll be really interesting to see how these pumpkins all yield, and then additionally how they sell, and come back and look at that when planning for next year. So after we determined all of our varieties to start working on the next stage of planning, which was our irrigation and plastic and everything, we had to know how much space we were actually going to be working with and footage wise. So we had to figure out our row spacing. Ultimately, we landed on 9-foot row spacing, and I was really happy with how that worked. I'll show you here in a minute how the rows look a couple weeks after our first tilling pass of the year post planting. But it worked out really well. We started by figuring out what our wheelbase width was for the tractor, which is about 6 feet. Gave a couple inches extra, so about a total foot of leeway to make sure that the tiller didn't catch any of the plastic. Then added 1.5 feet on each side, which got us to our 9 foot because we did 3 feet wide areas of plastic. With the pumpkins being pushing 6 weeks or so old, 7 weeks maybe, I'm really happy with the space that we went with. I did reach out to Osborne Quality Seed to confirm, hey, how much space, kind of our in-row spacing, things like that. What do you recommend? They had said, 3 to 4 foot in row, 6 up to 14 foot kind of for the row width would be adequate. So I felt comfortable with the 9 foot that I had worked up, and I'm really happy with this. I mean, as you can see, stuff's starting to reach over into the next row, and we're building up a good canopy. The plan to be able to till in between the rows worked really well. As you can see, we only made 1 tillage pass post-planting, and the center areas are relatively weed-free. We do have the grass that never got tilled right on the edge of the plastic. I just sprayed that a couple of days ago with Cleth. Anticipate that here within the next week or 2, this grass will be gone. All right, so please excuse the crudeness, but this is our very poor drawing of our irrigation system setup. It's nothing pretty, but this is essentially reworked as to how I did it when I was planning this stuff all out and ordering. We got everything we needed. It worked really well, and just thought I would kind of recreate and walk through how I did that. Really, the problem to figure out was we were going to be going from our hydrant to the field, and we had about 140-ish feet that we needed to cover to go there. With my grandparents have a little garden that sits in the way there. So how we landed on starting was got a 150-foot garden hose. Figured if we don't ever do pumpkins again, a garden hose is something that we can reuse time and time again. So we took and ran that garden hose down and then kind of circled to highlight a little bit more in depth here what we put at the end of the garden hose. This yellow block here, that is our backflow preventer. So that is what we put on there to prevent any water backflow when we shut the system off to avoid creating a vacuum. Below that is our filter and regulator. We run it off the well, so this isn't a filtered water system. So the filter is needed to clean out any sediment, anything like that. With running a drip tape, we needed a low pressure system, especially coming out of our hydrant. So we got one that had a 15 PSI pressure regulator. From there, we ran down here to a short distance of our main line into a T, and then split out the main lines to a ball valve on each side. That ball valve is kind of shown right here, and then each of these blocks is our zones. So initially we had planned on doing 11 rows. We ended up only doing 9, but what we did is we figured out our zones by, the total footage. We wanted to have about an equal split. We knew we were going to put about 1,200 linear feet in, so we split it up pretty close to 600 and 600. So we have our 4 longest rows here, and then we've got 5 shorter rows, which was going to be 7 shorter rows on the other side. For each of these zones is a ball valve to turn on and off. And then we run our 1¼ inch main line out. Each of these little green marks is where we had a barb takeoff. Hooked up the drip tape, ran it down, and then we have at the end a little end cap. End caps obviously on each end of the main line. And that's really what we kind of ran. For our drip tape, we ended up going with a 12-inch emitter spacing. That was largely based around knowing that we were going to be planting the pumpkins about 4 foot apart from each other. So we didn't need anything like 6-inch emitter spacing or something smaller. At the same time, wanted to make sure that we were going to be getting water basically within that hole of where we're planting the pumpkin, or somewhere within that close proximity. That's how we landed on the 12 inches, and then the 0.56 gallon per hour flow rate was dependent upon our well flow rate, and it's worked out really well. With the math that I kind of worked backwards is we're given the pumpkins right about a 1/2 inch of water per hour that we run it. So it works out really well. All the research that I had done is that the pumpkins like to have 1 inch to 2 inches per week, and that's worked out really well to be able to run it very easily, throw a timer on, and be able to run them for an hour at a time. Know you're giving them about a 1/2 inch, and can do that multiple times during the week to supplement or to adjust where if we got a lot of rain, don't have to run it quite as often. So it's worked out really well. It's not a fancy system, but we haven't had problems. When it comes time to take it apart, pretty much everything will be reusable, and that was a big factor for us. All in all, I think we spent about $300, including the shipping, to get everything. And it is going to be well worth that in time savings. Really just the increase in crop production, being able to keep these pumpkins watered when we get into August. It'll be great to be able to keep putting some water to these while the fruit's still growing and end up with nice, healthy, large pumpkins. So after determining our varieties and our irrigation setup and everything, we had to work through, okay, how are we going to plant these? What do we want to do? Do we want to use plastic, not use plastic? Ultimately, as you can see, we landed on using plastic. Probably the biggest struggle with that was figuring out what we wanted to use. Read all sorts of different stuff. I was trying to go with something that would be reusable, which I had read that the woven was. I just didn't think through it, and I was trying to be cheap and figured, oh, hey, we can buy a 6-foot roll and cut it in half and have 3 foot. And if you know anything about this stuff, that was a terrible idea. I'm not sure if you can make it out real well there. Definitely can here on the corner. This stuff is essentially a tarp. With that, when you cut it, it starts to fray. I thought that cutting it was going to be easy. It was a huge roll. We tried using a hot knife and trying to find other ways to cut it. Didn't work. So we made the mistake, but we thought we were being really innovative. Caitlin, how did we decide to cut our plastic?
We ended up cutting our plastic with a chainsaw.
which was, it seemed like, okay, it's going to zip right through it. We have like one of the DeWalt battery operated ones. It was terrible. Plastic went everywhere, kept snagging. We got through it, but it was not pretty. So once we had our plastic laid, we stapled it all down, tried to pull it into as straight a rows as we could, which I think we did fairly decent. And then Katelyn came through and walked out about 4-foot spacing and marked it with marking paint. And I came through behind, used a propane torch and burned holes. Gave us about a 6 to 8 inch hole. Some of them got a little crazy, but it worked really well. And it was pretty quick once we got going. And here you can kind of see what that first row looked like. Then what we did, since this is a very heavy clay soil, it's not the best thing. Nutrient-wise, don't completely know what all we've got. So what we did is we went through and I got like one of the bulb planter augers, drilled a small hole in each, and then dropped in some potting soil or garden soil, and then dropped our seeds into that, kind of packed it down after, and waited to see what germinated. Probably the one issue we had with that is some of our planting depth, I think, got a little bit too deep. Reason I'm thinking maybe we got a little bit deep on our planting depth is these last 3 rows were planted all the same night. Variety-wise, I'd have to double check what we've got, but these were predominantly all of our stacking varieties. As you can see, this row here, super sparse on the germination. This row here, pretty sparse. You know, some of these here, these are all planted the same time. Kind of in the center there is doing a lot better. Some of these here towards the end are still looking pretty young. But then, you know, this last row that I'd planted, I don't think that there is probably a plant or a hole down this row that didn't have 1 up to even 3 plants that had germinated out of it. I mean, it just did phenomenal. I think at that point I was going quicker, wasn't getting my holes dug as deep, and I think that was honestly to our benefit. So yeah, like I said, I mean, this is the last plants that got planted, and as you can see, this is the first variety, I'll need to go back and look at my notes as far as what it is, that I'm seeing actually pollinated females on. That's pretty crazy. The youngest plants, definitely the ones that are thriving the most. So once we figure out, yeah, here's another one. This one, the fruit itself doesn't look real great. Got some bugs on there. Smelly will be spraying stuff. But as you can see, this stuff's doing great. In addition to the planting depth, or kind of in with that, we had issues with our first varieties. Obviously, the things I was most concerned about us getting going were our carvers, specifically our hawk variety, because we're kind of going to be our main big crop product. We got those, we planted the first 2 rows of those, and then we got just absolutely hammered with rain. I think it was something ridiculous, like 6 inches in 2 days or less than 2 days. And we were out here picking up seeds that had gotten completely washed out their rows. We were there finding them in the middle of the walkway, in between, you know, planting holes and whatnot. And it just was not great. It was really disheartening for being our first. I mean, that was 2 or 3 days after planting. I mean, we knew we were going to get hit with rain, didn't know it was going to be anything like that. Trying to be resilient about it, we decided to try and transplant some stuff. This little area down here, this would be some hawk and hulk plants that we had transplanted. So we had found, you know, holes that had 3 or so plants that had came up we could safely separate, and then we pulled them and transplanted them. The plants ended up making it. It was really hard on them. We got to like 95 every day for the week after we had transplanted them, and it really stunted them. I mean, you can see these would be plants that are pretty much the same age. So some of these we may not end up gathering any fruit from, but live and learn. We were trying to do what we could to make the most of our field. That's kind of where we're at. We'll hop over back into the office here and talk a little bit about the good and the bad and everything like that. But that's where we're at this point. Like I said, plants are around 8 weeks old. It is right at the end of July here. August will be this weekend. Then we'll be, you know, a month from now, we'll be able to see what we've really got out here for fruit. Coming through here tomorrow and going to give a little bit of 10-10-10. Some of these might skip on that and wait until we put in 0-10-10 here in a couple of weeks. But definitely some of these smaller plants that are a little bit behind, going to give them a shot of 10-10 fertilizer, hopefully kind of help them out, and then continue to work through. We're continuing to kind of go through here and pull vines out of the hayfield, as well as try and untangle stuff so that everything's not completely grown on top of each other. For what it's worth, I'm very happy with the way things are going. We were talking about pumpkins being washed out of their hole, and here is a pumpkin that is just now germinating. Late July. I don't think we're going to get anything from that guy. Too funny. All right, well, this is not the office, but just about feels like it. So back out here taking a look at things. It's been probably not quite 2 weeks, but somewhere around a week and a half since all these other videos here. But out here taking a look at things and figured may as well just give a recap while we're out here. Kind of doing a walkthrough tonight. We had gotten a good bit of rain here in the last couple of days, a little over 3/4 of an inch, pushing about. So kind of checking on stuff. We have a busy next week ahead of us. Going to be heading to the Des Moines Farmers Market for a dog chew business. Meeting a customer in Osceola, Iowa to get a couple of goats heading down to Kansas. And then after that, heading to Vegas for Super Zoo for a dog chew business. So I'm sure I'll talk a little bit on that again sometime. But wanted to go ahead and kind of recap everything here with the pumpkins. All right, as you can see, stuff has grown a ton. Since the last video, you can see that the Grass Out Max has really gone to work here. All this grass has just been torched. Still got some broadleaf stuff that we could come through and remove, but the pumpkins just look awesome. Really, really happy with them. Also applied some granular 10-10-10 fertilizer to them. It really really gave a shot of growth to stuff here over the last, like I said, 10 to 12 days. Starting to see a lot of fruit coming on. Pretty sure these are some crystal stars in this row. And just stuff's looking really good. We will probably follow up after we get back from Vegas with a round of liquid 0-10-10 to really push some nutrients for bloom and fruit. But I mean, even plants that had gotten hit by bugs have bounced back really nice. But I am just really happy with the way stuff looks. All right, so before my phone dies here or I get down a rabbit hole too much of what should essentially be a whole other video on a pumpkin patch update, we'll talk real quickly on the pros and cons. What has made it after rough starts looks really good. As you just saw, plants look awesome. I'm really happy with it. We're seeing a lot of fruit. Irrigation systems worked well. Weed management has gone well. You know, I was a little behind the 8 ball maybe in actually getting a hold of things, but what we did worked really well. You know, the grasses died off considerably over the last couple of weeks, and what broadleaf stuff there is, I'm not too concerned about. The pumpkins are super healthy. They aren't really having to compete with a whole lot, in my opinion. And then, you know, in addition to the weed management, the irrigation system has worked well. We had to use it quite a bit early. Haven't here for the last couple of weeks. We got about 4 inches of rain in the last week, I'd say. So we'll see how any potential fungus problems arise. And then really the last pro is it's been fun. It's been rewarding. Gotten to spend a lot of time with Katelyn out here. And not much more you can ask for there. It's been time for us to spend together. It's been really fun to talk about, you know, the pumpkins and saving a couple back to take some pictures of the baby with them. Yeah, it's been what I've wanted it to be so far. So now we start planning on, you know, we're about a month and a half from hopefully opening the farm stand. It seems crazy because you don't see larger size pumpkins yet, but have some faith and I'm sure they'll be there. But we're starting to plan on getting a hold of some mums, getting some straw, corn stalks, all that fun stuff, and here pretty quickly having a farm stand to put together. But I'm not gonna lie to you, everything isn't always sunshine and rainbows, and we've definitely had our fair share of learning curves and issues that have arose. The first being, as I talked about earlier, initial planting didn't go well. We got all that rain, had a bunch of seeds that pretty much went to waste and didn't germinate. And then we were probably a little behind the 8 ball as far as transplanting goes. Learned for next year, either start stuff inside or be a little bit more proactive on when we're getting seeds in the ground as far as the weather goes and plan accordingly. Other kind of negative or thing we've struggled with, as I just said, is pests. We only lost probably 5 or so plants to vine borers have been the most completely catastrophic. We lost, like I said, probably 5 plants to them. Go ahead and break it open and you should see a little white worm. And sure enough, there it is. So that is a vine borer.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Which when you only have so many out here, 5 plants is probably, 5 to maybe 10 pumpkins, so $25 to $50 there, which covers a quarter of our seed and, helps recoup some other expenses, but it is what it is. Aside from the vine borers, we really briefly at the beginning noticed squash bugs. We got a pretty good handle on them really quickly, and then cucumber beetles were probably the other one that looked the worst. I haven't seen some for a few days, but I am seeing some tonight. Not enough that's real alarming. We will probably do one more application Saturday evening before we get gone for a week. I like to spray pretty much right at dusk after pollinators have left. But, I've seen some fruit that they damaged that was really young fruit. They've killed some blooms. But aside from that, we took care of them pretty well. So it's going to pretty well do it for me here tonight, guys. I hope you've enjoyed this video. This is kind of a first look at the initial half of our pumpkin season. Upcoming videos will probably be kind of updates on how things are going, any issues we are fighting along the way here, and then starting to prep for the farm stand. We're really excited about that. We're about a month and a half from our target opening date. We're going to shoot for September 19th, I think. Today is August 7th, so it's creeping up on us. I'm sure if you're looking at the pumpkins, you're probably hard-pressed to imagine that we're actually going to have pumpkins ready then, but I have some faith. We'll have some mums, straw bales, corn stalks, all that other fun stuff. But again, thank you for watching. I know I've rambled a little bit. Hasn't been the cleanest video, I am certain, but I hope you've enjoyed. Leave a comment down below with any questions, comments, thoughts you may have. Look forward to hopefully engaging with people and kind of building a small community around this here and sharing other things we've got going on. Be sure to also like and subscribe. Don't really have a goal right now. I think it'd be really cool to have, 1,000 people some point that are watching our videos and following along and sharing their thoughts and hopefully learning something from us along the way as we learn as well. Once again, thank you guys. I am Hunter here with New Era Acres, and I look forward to you watching more of our videos.